ask yourself exactly that question. Am I getting promoted? Am I getting raises because I'm actually improving my skills? Or is it because I have tenure and I have a knowledge base that's really valuable to the company?
In today's episode, we have Hunter Meyer. Hunter is an engineering manager at Box and founder at Meyer Visions, a venture capital firm that invests early in founders building fast-growing technology companies. Hunter's career in programming did not start immediately. He graduated from a university with a degree in marketing, entered the workforce, but wasn't happy with his career. So eventually, he wanted to take computer science and become a programmer, but didn't want to spend the money to go back to school for another 4 years. So at the age of 22, he quit his job, learned Ruby, and went to a coding bootcamp, which propelled him to where he's at today. Welcome, Hunter.
Thanks, Felix. Happy to be here.
First of all, amazing story, and it really serves as an inspiration to other people that it's never too late to start another career. So tell us about this coding bootcamp experience.
Yeah, so you had it right. I went to school for marketing, and I was in the career force. I ended up just selling things over the phone, and I wasn't very happy. I was dabbling with tech on the side. My friends were making a bunch of money, having fun. I was spending money on suits, and trying to impress in the professional world. And they're all wearing flip-flops and shorts, having a great time. So like you said, I looked into going into university, didn't want to spend a ton of money to go get a bachelor's in computer science. So I started looking into these coding boot camps. I started looking online. I was using, I believe the first one was Codecademy to become familiar with just like syntax of Ruby and JavaScript. Started hacking it on my own. I found that I really enjoyed the process of building things and creating things. So yeah, in that moment, I decided to quit my job. I went home to Orlando, Florida. I was living in Colorado at the time. Went back to Orlando, spent about 2 months preparing, learning code. I did RubyMonk was another huge, valuable tool online that was very difficult. And then I started looking at all these coding boot camps, and I can't name them all, but the one that I landed on was called Epicodus, which is out in Portland, Oregon. The big part of what drew me to them was, one, they were very affordable, but most importantly, they were like 14 weeks long, which is a fairly long amount of time. And I wanted a program that was long and intense so that I didn't just learn, the surface level, how to build a HTML website. I wanted to learn the full stack, Ruby, Rails, JavaScript, SQL. And so Epicodus was stood out to me. I applied, did a couple of interview questions, and yeah, it was probably one of the best career decisions I've ever made in my life.
Yeah, Ruby was the first language that I learned too. And for others out there that are thinking about it or were in your shoes and not sure yet if it's a path that they want to pursue, how do you recommend they dip their toes in the water? How do you recommend that they find out if it's actually a career switch that they want to make?
That's a really deeply personal question. I think what to dip your toes in would be to use one of those online tools. I think Free Code Camp is another one that's out there that's available. But definitely look at like Codecademy. I think just start getting the idea of what code looks like, and then start working your way into seeing how to build things, how to build simple apps. And then I really think I wouldn't want to advise someone just to, take a leap of faith, kind of like I did. It was pretty scary, but get some familiarity with code. Find a problem and solve it. Like for me, what really drove me into it, my first project, was in the morning when I was in Colorado. In the morning, I used to like to watch, TV or something like that while I'm eating breakfast before work. But at the time, I didn't have cable, so I only had the internet. So I used YouTube. And YouTube, to me, was slow. I'd spend all my time searching for a video, clicking on it, and by that time, my cereal got soggy. So I said, I want to build a simple app that is just like a playlist finder that auto plays YouTube videos. So I can type in funny videos, it'll start playing, and then autoplay next, which is now a feature on YouTube, but at the time they didn't have it. So I built a really simple JavaScript app that interacted with the YouTube API and solved my problem. And I think that was the catalyst to the career choice I made. So definitely I would start with get familiar with the code, see what it looks like. Ruby is a very human, readable, friendly language. So I would recommend people look into that one, or Python is another good one as well. and then try to build a project. Try to find a problem that you can automate. Maybe it's building a better timer widget for Mac or something like that before jumping into, a coding boot camp. But do your due diligence to make sure it's worth that you at least have some kind of interest in it.
And you mentioned that during this process to look for a coding boot camp, you had to interview to get into it. A lot of people might be thinking that, you just pay your money and then you get accepted and then someone teaches you how to get a job in the field, but it's actually a vetting process that's involved. So talk to us a little bit more about what that vetting process is like and how do you prepare to get accepted into a coding boot camp?
That's a great question. I think it's very important to, if you're shopping coding boot camps, is to, I think, make sure there is an interview process, that it's not just take your money. Because, this was several years ago, a decade ago. Today, the landscape for coding boot camps is much wider. And there's a lot of competition, but there's also probably some code camps that aren't doing that great of a job. So I think it is important to make sure that there is some threshold to getting acceptance, so that not just, turning into a certificate factory, pumping people in and out. So I can speak to the interview process was pretty straightforward. It started initially with a phone call to find out who I am, what my interests are, why I decided to look into Epicodus, sort of, kind of a pre-interview. And then the actual technical interview was just simple questions like, they were focused on Ruby. So it was, what is a class? What is an object? Can you define test-driven development? What is RSpec? Really basic things that sort of just tested vocabulary. There wasn't any algorithm questions. It was sort of just making sure that I was a student who was passionate and wanted to learn and had some experience writing some code.
And it looks like after Epicodus experience, you graduated from that boot camp, your first job was an internship. How hard was it to get that first job or that first internship after a boot camp?
Thankfully, that internship started while I was at the coding boot camp. It was with KBOO FM, which is a local radio station in Portland, Oregon. Big shout out to them. They're amazing. So the coding boot camp actually set up that internship where we redesigned their website and put a audio player on their website that stuck around as you navigate the website and continue to play KBOO FM.
How are you able to land? How was that set up with the coding boot camp? Was just like giving people or getting internships for the students?
That's right. So the owner, Michael, he networked with local businesses in the area, in that Portland area, to arrange internships, which turned into our final projects for the coding boot camp. And so it was actually a really good way to have like an exit from this boot camp. Was, we were building hard projects that were our own and, testing each other and learning how to work with others, doing some pair programming, but they were not real world problems, right? And so Michael went out into the community, found some businesses that needed some projects built, from developers who are brand new to the field. And then he would create like factions, little small teams within the coding bootcamp. So there's about 30 of us. I think we were on teams of about 6 or so, and we work on those projects, learn how to work as a team, to project manage, to use GitHub. And then that final project, and along with other projects we completed in the boot camp, was a package we were able to present at the end of our boot camp when we were looking for jobs, meeting with local people in the field. We could show them something that we built and that we have real world experience, not just sort of homework that we've done in the boot camp.
Yeah, I think that's so critical, and I don't see this as often. So I think it's super interesting that this coding boot camp, especially 10 years ago, was doing this where they were getting real work experience. Because yes, your final project at a coding boot camp can be extensive, can be complex, but there's something about that validation from the real world that you've contributed code to an actual company. That's a great stamp of approval for your next, quote unquote, like real job. So let's talk about that next job when you were on your own now and you had to figure out how to get your own job yourself. What was that like? How was that process to getting the next job after the internship?
That process was challenging, and I was sort of on my own. So after the boot camp, which was in Oregon, I moved back home to Florida, and the boot camp I was at the time was very small. I didn't really have quite a reach, an influence with employers outside of the Portland, Oregon area. So I was home in Orlando. I really was tough. I was sending out resumes, working with recruiters, I got a couple of offers, but the salary was just way too low. It was less than what I was making in marketing, and money is very important. I want to have a good career. So believe it or not, my first job was sort of like an internship. I was writing .NET code in C# for a local business that was very small startup. And so I had to learn .NET and C# on the job, which was really cool. It was scary. It was daunting because I had only familiarity in Rails and HTML and JavaScript. So going into .NET was a little scary, but ultimately I did really well. And I found that, once you understand the basics of the language, you can translate it to almost any other language relatively easily. Now, I started to get a little uneasy. I remember confiding to my wife at the time, like, I don't know, maybe I can't get a real job in programming. I'm just not good enough. Maybe I should have went to school. And I was, it was stressful. And I actually considered going back into marketing and sales. However, I found this one job that was out in Atlanta, Georgia, Listen 360. And I just, shooting a resume over via LinkedIn, I believe, got a call back from the CTO. We spoke over the phone, and they were really interested in coding bootcamp graduates because they had traditionally, they're a small company, but they traditionally hired computer science graduates. Bootcamps were fairly new and novel. They wanted to see what it was like, what we're learning. And they decided to fly me up for an interview, and they rolled out the red carpet. They flew me first class. They had a car pick me up from the airport, and I got to this office, and they threw me an interview, right away into a technical interview. They asked me some basic SQL, like how to do joins, where clauses, and the having clause, as well as group by clause. So pretty technical SQL questions, and then they abstracted it into active record questions, and it was very stressful because it was my first tech job, but I felt like I did really well, and I ended up flying back home. A couple days later, I got a call back, and they wanted to hire me. But it did require me to relocate. So my wife and I talked it over, and it seemed like it was a good opportunity. The money was right. And so I relocated to Georgia, and I was at that company for about 7 years.
Wow, you did a lot of moving around in the very beginning of your software engineering career. And this job, I think that you're talking about, was one where you stayed for 6 years, and it sounds like a great opportunity. It sounds like a great start, but you do believe that it was one of your career setbacks to stay at this first job for 6 years. Tell us more about why you felt like that was a setback, and like maybe how costly was that decision.
Yeah, I think it was a setback in the regards to sort of my own confidence level. There was times that I years on, maybe 4 or 5 years into it, when I was looking to go to do something more. I wanted to get more experience. I started feeling like staying in one job too long, especially early in my career, was going to hamper my skills and my development. So I was rising up, becoming a senior engineer. But I started questioning, am I a senior engineer at this company, which again was, medium scale, kind of small company? Am I a senior at this company because I know the business well, I know the employees, I get along with everybody, and I write pretty good code? But, would I be able to go to another company and still be a senior? What is that definition? What does that mean? So it was a little bit of fear of almost maybe like sort of an imposter syndrome sort of feeling that, the longer I stayed, the more I was going to hamper my career because, I was going to avoid doing interviews. I was avoiding really getting the challenge of another career and testing my skills. So yeah, I do believe it, as much as that company boosted my development, and I am who I am today, and I'm from the experience I got there, good friends that I still talk to this day, learned really good code, got to build full stack applications that reach millions of users. I do think there's a bit of risk of staying somewhere too long because you start becoming too culturally connected to that business, and you start losing that transferable skills that you can apply elsewhere.
Yeah, it's like when you are senior or you're getting these kind of promotions at the same company, you might just be getting better at doing the job at that current company, but are you actually being a better, well-rounded software engineer across different companies? I think that's important, especially when you're thinking about a long-term career. And I've heard the saying, too, where you might have 6 years of experience, but is it really 6 years of experience or 6 times 1 year of experience? And there's kind of like a nuance there where maybe you're doing the same thing just over 6 years, or are you actually growing? And it's hard to see that when you're in the same company. So if someone out there is at a company, maybe they're there for longer, for a while, for a few years, how do you know? How do you recognize, okay, maybe it's time to move on? I think it's really hard to see that. How do you recommend people look out for signs that it's time to move on?
Again, very personal question. I think the signs come from inside. Ask yourself exactly that question. Am I getting promoted? Am I getting raises because I'm actually improving my skills? Or is it because I have tenure and I have a knowledge base that's really valuable to the company, but less of my productivity or my development. So I think it's really just about evaluating yourself. I had a friend of mine who said when he got out of boot camp, his mission was to work at 3 companies in 5 years. So he didn't even have to worry about checking that temperature in each job. He just said, okay, year and a half, it's time to move. And I've seen a lot of folks do that. So it really just comes down to what you're asking yourself, what your goals are. Do you want to make more money? Because you can stay put and keep making tons of money and you're going to be fine. If you want to develop that muscle and becoming a more well-rounded, experienced engineer, then maybe you need to consider, getting either, if you're a medium-sized company or a larger company, maybe there's internal movement you can do. But if it's a small company, a lot of times it's going to be looking outward at other opportunities.
Yeah, and now that you have experience as an engineering manager and that you are an engineering manager, how do you view candidates that have moved around like this? I think there's a concern too where what's the right balance where you are moving because it advances your career, you're getting a step level promotion by changing companies, you're getting more money. So you're incentivized to do this at a kind of a micro level, but over the span of your career, you're a hiring manager and you're seeing this, like, is there a point where you're like, this is kind of a red flag that you're jumping around too much?
Yeah. I mean, career development is a chess game. It's not there's infinite number of moves that you can make and each one has opportunity and risk associated with it. As a hiring manager, and I look and I see folks who have moved around, my key indicator is career progression. It's not necessarily that you stayed at a company from 1 year to next, but if you're bouncing around every year and you're still at the software engineer position, you haven't graduated to either senior or any of the different levels or staff or even further on to like an architect, I'm not seeing career progression, and that's more of a red flag than you bouncing around. And in fact, seeing folks who have moved around, I'm actually pretty interested in that because I want to understand why they moved around, what they're seeking out in a career. This gives me a lot of opportunity to learn from someone and potentially provide them a place where they can do their best work. And they also bring with them a lot of diversity. They've worked with other teams, they've worked with other problems, technology. Were they at a business-facing, employer, or were they at a customer-facing business? So I think there's a lot to be reviewed there. The only red flag I would say is just career progression. And that's true as well for someone who's stayed in a position for a while. So if I see you spent, like for myself, 6 or 7 years at a company, but I don't see any kind of career progression, that's a bit of a red flag. If you just, stuck at that one level and didn't really grow. So again, progression over variation.
Makes sense. Now let's move forward to what your day-to-day is like now as an engineering manager. I love how you focus and start your day off really focusing on the kind of personal life, family life. Tell us more about how you set that up before you begin your workday.
Oh, I'd love to. So yeah, I have 2 wonderful kids. One's 2 years old and one just turned 1. So my morning usually starts off with my wife and I waking them up, getting breakfast, and we like to sit down and have breakfast with each other and, have some chit chat. Obviously my 1-year-old can't talk. My 2-year-old has so much to say, and it's just a lot of fun. So it really helps center me and prepare me for my day. And I also bring that emotional connection into the workplace as well. I understand that we're working with people, right? And people come first. So building rapport, understanding that, the people I work with have kids at home. Sometimes they're sick. Sometimes they need to, drive them to daycare or pick them up, or the babysitter's out or something like that. There's, life exists outside of work. And I think experiencing and embracing and valuing your home life gives good opportunity for you to help other people at work as well.
Yeah, and this concept of work-life balance lately has become, I've seen it become as important, maybe more important than compensation these days. As someone that is, let's say, an individual contributor that's not an engineering manager, that's just a software engineer, how do you recommend that they protect that balance and that they have the time, like you're talking about, to make sure that you put your personal life, your family life, that's just as important as your work life? How do you make sure that that is protected?
My key advice to someone like that would be to tell your manager, to be vocal about it. One of the candidates we recently hired during the interview, told me straight up, like, here's the situation. I might have to take a couple of days off here and there. My kid's in and out of daycare, and sometimes daycare closes because of COVID, so I need to be there. So I think being vocal about it is step one, because what you'll find is, more than not, people want to help other people, especially in the workforce, in the workplace, right? So communicate. Tell me what the issue is. Tell me, or not even an issue, just tell me the situation, and we'll work around it. We're working from home today. We work in an international, multinational, multi-state, multi-time zone employer. So we have to be resilient to the changes in the dynamics of home life. So I think just step one really is to just be vocal about it. And when it comes to, home life, it depends on the individual. Some people that have kids are going to want to, spend more time with their children. If you're, an individual, maybe you're working on some side projects or something like that. But it's important to compartmentalize your work and make sure you have an activity outside of work that gives you, value, that gives you challenge, that gives you excitement and pleasure, so that you're not just consumed with work.
Yeah, and speaking of being consumed with work, I think that what I sometimes see in companies is this hero culture where someone's willing to just step up and like grind it out, put in way more hours than is expected, way more hours than others to kind of get things done. And hearing someone say that, it sounds like, okay, that's great. You have a great addition to the team, but then it could also now feel like there's like this pressure for the rest of the team to maybe I need to kind of start stepping up more and eke more out of my personal time and to put more time into work. Have you seen this in your career? And like, are there ways in from the management side to address this? A, do you think it's a concern? And B, like, how would you address something like that?
When that happens, I think it's on us as managers and leaders on the team as well to immediately call that out and stamp it out. So if we're in a meeting, and this has happened before, where people mention like, oh yeah, I stayed up late, we say, no, don't do that. Do it within the hours, because one, it's not healthy for you, but two, it sets bad examples for the other employees. That's not the type of culture we want. So I think it's important and imperative for managers and other leadership to stamp it out when they see it. Right there on the spot. I've done it in group meetings, saying that's not good, that's not healthy, that's not good for the other engineers who are sort of learning the culture.
I love that. That's super rare. I never hear or see that, and so I appreciate that you're doing something like that. Now, speaking of prioritizing and spending your time correctly, you start your day by time boxing. So first of all, what is time boxing and how do you use it?
Yeah, time boxing, I use School Calendar, and I just draw boxes, sort of events that are hour long or 2 hour long, where I dedicate that span of time to some tasks. Some of that might be responding to email, catching up on Slack. Maybe as an engineer, when I used to, way back in the day, I guess, what I used to time box was looking at errors. So I'd go and see what were the errors from the night before. If we had like some kind of like rescue logging or some kind of tool, I'd go and look at the errors and see, was there a spike? Is this, within range, and start clearing things out. And then I would as well look at what I call the fast lane. So these would be like small tickets that are maybe some bugs or questions, very, very small ones that don't necessarily need to get prioritized into the sprint, but just need to be addressed because they're low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So I'd go after that kind of fast lane before I would get into, meetings or head down focus time for sprint activities and things like that.
Yeah, and because there's always more to do than there's time to do it, how did you learn to know what to say yes to and what to say no to?
That's a very difficult skill that needs refinement, and I even fall on it. It's really about understanding priorities and That can be set from leadership. They can be set and agreed upon by the team. For example, if you're an on-call engineer that is working, bugs or things like that are on call during the day, your focus is the bug backlog, for example. So if things come in outside, there's questions, it's really just to say, I think there's a communication that we can develop. There's a bit of a template for it. It's like, I have this current priority. If you're asking me to take my attention off that to go into this, this is the consequence. Is that what you want? And so if a leader comes to you and say, hey, can you look at this project? You say, hey, I'm on the bug priorities right now. If you'd like me to stop and look at what you're asking me for, I won't be able to address this other prioritized items. Is that what you'd like me to do? And usually when you get that kind of pushback, people have forced the requester to think, is what I'm asking for that important? Is it that urgent? And I also have a matrix I use for that too when it comes to sort of difficult prioritizations where you have things that are very important, almost equally. How do you decide which one to pick on? And there's a couple of different processes. One of the prioritization matrix is about urgency and importance. So if it's important and urgent, do it right now. If it's important but it's not so urgent, we can delegate or schedule. If it's not important and not urgent, then we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, and so I want to move on to now your experience working at a team like a company like Box, where your team is fully remote, and I think Box has always been supportive of remote work. I think a concern that comes up is when an engineer is deciding about whether they want a remote job or a job in the office. Maybe the team is half in the office and they are more remote. I think the concern is about career progression, that you might be losing out on something because you're not seeing the people day to day as like in relation to advancing your career, that you're not in front of people's face every day, that somehow it impacts your career. Is this true? Do you find that's true? Not true? What were your thoughts on that?
I think it could be true. I think it's important for leadership to set a culture in which that we're supportive, and making sure that that is not a bias that we use when it comes to performance management or any kind of talent review, is that the fact that you don't see them every day. So, for example, if you're a manager that's in the office and you see some of your peers daily, but your remote employees you don't only see over the camera for scheduled meetings, that you make sure that that isn't a bias that's influencing how you reflect upon their key objectives or key performance indicators. Now, from an engineer's perspective, for me, I never saw it as a career hindrance. More of just it kind of detracts from the fun of work. When I was in person, I really enjoyed, chit-chatting with folks on the way to the break room or going to lunch together. You build a camaraderie. You get an opportunity to talk about things unscheduled. So like free-form dialogue, the pop-in, they call it, where you just kind of pop in and ask a question and walk away. And I think time to question resolution and is much quicker in a face-to-face environment. When you're in remote, what becomes challenging is almost every conversation has to be scheduled. There's not that impromptu pop in. I can't catch you on the way to the break room. I can't go to lunch with you and pick your brain. So I think that's more about just, I might not have as much fun, because I don't get to see, my friends, my colleagues, less as a career hindrance. It would be tough for me to see that as a career hindrance, because at the end of the day, we have objective measurables that you're going to be evaluated on, and that doesn't have it's irrespective of whether you're in person or remote.
That makes sense. So speaking of getting promoted, one advice that you give when people ask you about promotions and how to get promoted is to first know what the company's values are and then align yourself to them and take those values word for word. So tell us more about what that means. Like, can you give us an example of like a company value that at Box, and like how someone might align themselves to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you start thinking about a promotion, one thing I like to advise is try to answer the question of how am I already living out or acting out in the way of that next position. So say you're a software engineer, you're looking at a senior position. Try to explain how you're already doing the responsibilities or leadership mindsets of someone who is a senior engineer. And then when you come to phrasing and the wording you use, incorporate your key company values. And I like to anchor on company values, because if someone maybe disagrees with you. They're actually disagreeing with the company values and less of your argument. So it's kind of a interesting rhetorical device to use, is to just incorporate those company values. So one of them was at Box is being an owner. And what that means is, we're a large organization. We have a lot of problems, and we can't just rely on there being a team that solves everything. And so if you see a problem, take ownership of it. It's your company, it's your product, it's your business. Take it on and solve it. And then you can showcase that later on. Say, for example, you have some kind of tool that always has an error when you post a link to it on Slack or something like that. And this is just a bit of an annoyance. But if you go and actually solve that problem, you demonstrate that being an owner. And so maybe what you solved is maybe then generate new money. It's really just kind of a nuance or a nuisance that you kind of patched. But when you phrase it as, I acted out the being an owner value by fixing this ongoing issue that people complain about, you have a much better job and that's what leadership wants to see, right? At the end of the day, the details aren't as important as, oh, they're acting out these values. Oh yeah, they're in.
I like that you're almost like using the values like a constitution that you're pointing back to. And it's like, hey, I am upholding like the most kind of sacred thing that this company cares about. So it gives you a lot of kind of ammunition, I guess, to get to vie for a promotion. When you think about the company values and how you align with them, do you recommend engineers focus more on leaning more into things that they're already strong in, like take that even further, or should they focus more on the weaknesses and getting those up to par? What do you think is more important?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think they're equally as important. Becoming a subject matter expert and refining your skills is tremendously important, and it will be very valuable for you in a career, especially if you were to sort of want to aspire into that architect position. I mean, these are people with expert knowledge in key technologies and areas. But then at the same time, identifying those areas of opportunities where you can develop is as important as well, because a lot of times those are soft skills as well, is what I find. So I actually think you can achieve both at the same time. I don't think they're in conflict with one another. I think you can work on, for example, communication and conflict resolution a little bit better, while also, becoming the expert in, React or SQL.
Makes sense. And once you progressing your career, you're getting these promotions, and you're hitting a point now where you're a senior engineer, and then you have this like notorious split, right, where you go down the technical route or go down the management route, staff engineer or go into engineering management. You chose the engineering management role, and tell us more about like what are some of the biggest myths or misconceptions that you had about engineering management before you got into it, and like what have you learned since?
Yeah, a myth I think for me was that you start losing technical skills, and maybe that's not so much as a myth, but that scared me when I went into management, was that I wasn't going to be touching code every day. I wasn't going to be looking at pull requests, and that potentially I'd be just focused on performance and spreadsheets and budgets and things like that. I found that to be sort of a myth that I challenged head on. I don't actually think that that's a written rule. I think some folks just kind of gravitate away from tech as they stay on the management route. I think it's up to the individual to challenge, and I did. So I still write code every day. On my side projects, I still review pull requests with my team and individually, and as well as engineering manager. I don't just rely on the people. I'm actually own the technical roadmap, which is another key thing. So a lot of companies have sort of a split. You have your product roadmap and then your technical roadmap. Your product roadmap's about developing new features, new product, things like that we're pretty familiar with. But your technical roadmap is things like upgrading versions of React or adding more monitoring and observability, improving performance on page load, auditing your tech to see if you're reaching the if you have security holes or if you have performance bottlenecks. And that tech backlog is often ones that I've heard being ones that get neglected, right? They get much more invested in stakeholders want to invest in a new product. They don't really care so much about that technical debt. They we'll figure that out, kind of what it does. So I think it's key to engineering managers is to stay close to the tech, understand the problems your engineers are having. Maybe there's a clunky release process, or maybe there's an organizational problem that needs to be addressed from like a management level. So EMs need to stay close to tech and own that roadmap. And again, just like I said before about incorporating those core values, those company values into your promotion packet, it's also true from an engineering manager to own that roadmap and to position the changes or big initiatives by leveraging those company values. So if you want to be 10x, right, you want to move fast and break things, well, you're going to need a technical platform that can allow you to iterate and experiment quickly. Product wants to release new features rapidly. Okay, well, we need a release pipeline that's not, clunky. We need a test suite that's not slow and takes hours to build. We need investment in these core technical areas in order to achieve, the vision that the company wants to see.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a ton of currency in just looking back at the company values and then using that as the evidence or the arguments to reflect what you want, the kind of changes that you want to make. The last question here about engineering management is that for a software engineer that, again, is at the senior level, they are considering the path of going more technical or going to management. What would you say is the most important question that they need to answer for themselves to make that decision?
I believe it's asking yourself, do you want to go into EM because software development has gotten too hard? As you grow in your career, you're going to face, especially when you start going into that senior staff level, the problems and ownership you'll have will be much harder and much broader. So the impacts you will make will affect the large, the company. You have to have you have a lot of responsibility. People are going to rely on you to have well thought out answers, and it's very, very difficult. It's a hard job. And I think sometimes people consider the management track as a way to, escape from those harder problems. That maybe they'll go into the people side. And I think it's important to answer that question, because if that's the case, you can't run into, people leadership by running away from hard coding problems, because you're just not going to do your people well. You're not going to do well by them.
I love that. Thank you so much, Hunter Meyer, engineering manager at Box, founder of Meyer Ventures. And that's all the time we have this week. Thank you so much for being here, Hunter.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Felix. It's great talking with you.
Awesome. So come out, hang out with us next time on Culture of Code. Again, I'm Felix here. Take care.